helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. I'm Kara Sundlin, and we like to check in with our friend Dr. Laura Saunders for our mental health boost. But this time, we're talking about what's happened in the news this week, where the Surgeon General actually says social media should come with a warning label, just like cigarettes or alcohol. So we want to find out, does she agree with this? And what should the warnings really be? So many concerns for our children. Dr. Laura Saunders, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Kara.
It almost sounds extreme when you first hear it, like, oh, really? Could social media be as bad as cigarettes? We all know cigarettes can kill us. Do you agree with the idea of a warning label?
Absolutely. That is my one-word response. I absolutely agree with it, because I think what we need to realize in this situation is that it's not just an hour of scrolling through Instagram or whatever that affects you. It's the cumulative effect. And, you know, it's spending hours a day, days on end. And because it becomes, like as we said, like a mind suck. It just, like, you lose track of time. Now you're on it for 3 or 4 hours. You know, we are seeing some significant negative mental health effects in younger people. And again, it's not any one person, although if you have underlying vulnerabilities around depression or anxiety or self-worth, I'm even more concerned about those individuals.
And especially among teen girls, you're now seeing more and more data that self-harm, I hear a lot about self-harm. It wasn't something I even remember growing up, and now we're seeing a lot of it. Is that part of what's being linked to what we're seeing on social media?
Yes, because we have no idea what kinds of images our teens are being exposed to. And, you know, Kara, you remember like 20 years ago, I mean, I did a bunch of different segments or stories. We would talk about how, like, you know, models in magazines were not realistic images for young girls. They were airbrushed. They were shown to be super skinny and have, you know, proportions that weren't reasonable. But it was something that was talked about. But again, a magazine is something that you looked at and then you put it down. These are images that are constantly, you know, our young people are being inundated with. So it's so much harder to escape. And I mean, again, the algorithms are what kind of suck you in. And they're designed by top-notch software developers who are far smarter than most of us. And they create these algorithms to keep you connected for long periods of time.
Yeah. A magazine we could put away, but right, the phones are always on us. The Surgeon General in the op-ed piece says that the threat that social media poses to children requires urgent action, and he's demanding that Congress put a label on the apps, as was done decades ago with cigarettes and alcohol. He's citing several studies, including an American Medical Association study that showed teens who spend 3 hours a day on social media double their risk of depression. But we know that teens are often spending more than 3 hours a day.
Right. A Gallup poll found out that teens are spending about 5 hours a day on social media. That is a tremendous amount of time. And so those 5 hours also mean that they're not necessarily interacting with their peers. They're not doing an activity. They're not going outside and doing something. They're not being active. So we are creating a generation of individuals who just, you know, never mind, you know, affecting their eyesight, who are less active, less interactive, and more socially isolated, and spending hours at a time comparing the lowlights of their life to the highlights of someone else's life.
Yeah, the American Psychological Association also issued a report that details social media platforms built for adults, which are built for us, are really not suitable for youth. And that's been an argument, right, that we're becoming really overprotective in the physical world, but underprotective in the online world, which some of us just don't even know how to protect our kids very well in that virtual world.
Right. So that's a really good way to put it. We're becoming overprotective. You know, we've done a story here, or I've done a segment on, you know, not even let your kids sleep over someone else's house. Right. You know, so there's all sorts of things where we've become very overprotective, but in ways that are harder to monitor and supervise, we've become very underprotective. And I'm not blaming parents here. Parenting's the hardest job in the world. That's why, one of the things the Surgeon General is saying is that we need to better support parents. Parents cannot do this alone. We need our legislators, and this really is at a federal level, Congress to put these warnings on in the same way that, cigarette manufacturers, tobacco companies, the big tobacco companies were very much against warning labels on cigarettes. And it did do its job, right? Over time, it decreased cigarette use in the same way that there were warning labels put on alcohol. When a woman is pregnant, there is risk of harm to a developing fetus.
Right.
So these warning labels do curb people's behavior. That's what we want. And that's sometimes why some of these either social media companies or, they don't want that kind of curbing of behavior. But as parents, we need help. We need, federal level help to support us in trying to monitor some of the negative effects.
Yeah, so the Surgeon General urged parents to really restrict children's use of social media until they graduate from middle school. That's what we're being asked to do as parents right now. I think some parents are going to say, and I would have been one of them, as much as I tried, and there were rules in our house, that it's hard, even when you're trying. Because you all of a sudden feel like you're battling with your kids, or you're being a helicopter parent, that you're invading their phone all the time. Or what is your advice to parents, given that we want our kids to have healthy mental health?
So this is one of those situations where I do think it's important for parents to kind of bond together in some of this. There's a movement called Wait Until 8th Grade, and I think it's actually Wait Until 8th Grade. I think it's .org. Wait until the number 8th grade.org. And that movement is about parents signing on together, waiting until their kids graduate from middle school and finish 8th grade for their children to even get a smartphone. So a phone that has Wi-Fi access where I know there's some monitoring apps, but it really is hard to keep track of the things that your children are doing when they have access to Wi-Fi, where they can just hop on something and check out different sites or have different ads pop up that give them information. So that Wait Until 8th Grade movement is a movement to have parents band together so that it's not that constant, I'm the only one who doesn't have X, fill in the blank, a certain app or a phone or whatever. So we know that, I know that a majority of the kids in your school have agreed to this. So I don't really believe that parents, that you're the only child that doesn't have, whatever it is they're asking for.
Right, and maybe as more awareness happens, then there'll be more appetite to do this. The devil's advocate, there have been motions to try and ban phones in public schools, take them away. Some parents, I thought it was surprising, but I hear their arguments now. They were upset about it. They said, no, I want to be able to reach my kid. I need to be able to reach my kid. What if something bad happens, like a school shooting?
Right, but that, I know that's a very serious event, but we have to remember it, and I know it's happened here in Connecticut, but it's a very, very low probability event, right? I mean, the bigger issues are, and this is, I'm showing my age, when my sports practice ended early, a half hour, 45 minutes early, and I had to go to the payphone and make sure I had a dime and call my parents to pick me up early as opposed to waiting around, right? So yes, those kinds of things will happen where you want to have access, but there is really no need for children to have access to their phones during the day. And I believe there was a school in Manchester that was part of a pilot project where they had, all phones put in those kind of hermetically sealed pouches, like they do at some concerts and comedy venues where you cannot have access to them. You can have the phone with you, but you cannot have access to them.
Yeah.
Because it does create a lot of anxiety for everyone, for parents, for kids. Well, what if I need to reach them? Well, if something is really that urgent during the school day, then call the school. Yeah. Call the school and say, something really tragic has happened in my life and I need access to my child, and they'll go get the child, right? Yeah. So we need to really kind of reprioritize what we need and what's a need versus a want, and what we've become used to versus, what really is in our children's best interest.
And you've actually done a lot of research and presented this to schools around Connecticut. There is a difference with older brains versus younger brains. I want to call parents' attention to a book that's making a lot of headlines right now called The Anxious Generation. And his research basically showed that anxiety went through the roof with the invention of the smartphone, and that we really are rewiring kids' brains. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. And I think that book is on the New York Times bestseller list because
Yes.
I've seen it online. But I have not read it yet, but I do intend to read it because I do think it is changing our brains, right? Anxiety is the opposite of mindfulness. Mindfulness is like being in the moment, right? I'm sitting here, this is what I'm doing, this is what I see, this is what I feel. Anxiety is you're too far into the future or too worried about the past. And so that this anxious generation, if we're constantly looking at, even a show. So admittedly, I'm watching Bridgerton, right? And even on different social media platforms, they're giving me all these previews of episodes I haven't even seen yet. So I have the self-control to not look at something. But we are asking our teens to do things that they just don't have the capacity for. They don't have the capacity of perspective. They don't necessarily have the capacity of impulse control, and they don't have judgment, right? To deem what is appropriate or not appropriate. And so, when kids get catfished, right? Someone pretends to be someone they're not. It's very concerning because they just don't have the judgment to deal with those situations.
And I've seen young lives really derailed as a news anchor where we, report on something that got out that they thought was never going to get out. Maybe they took video of something they shouldn't have taken video of. We all made mistakes when we were kids, but not every moment of our life was being recorded. Now, sometimes these kids might be using their smartphones. They have it all the time, and they might actually be recording something that they shouldn't be doing that can really come back and ruin them as well. Part of that just not having the judgment of what should I make a record of and what should I not.
Right. Right. And that's kind of a core developmental issue. We know that teens don't have, they develop over time. They develop moral judgment and social judgment. They develop judgment, but at 14, 15, 16, 17, they don't necessarily have good judgment. They make a lot of impulsive decisions that can be potentially negative for them. Some of those things we want them to learn over. However, when we do things that create kind of catastrophic shame, that's when it becomes really concerning, right? And so everything that you do or say could potentially be recorded. I would never have wanted that as a teenager or young adult, because we need to kind of do things and experiment and sometimes make bad decisions, but not have those bad decisions have catastrophic consequences.
What if you're already down the rabbit hole? Your kids have phones, they're on them, and you're realizing, hey, there's some new information. Like we once used to think the only bad thing about cigarettes was that they made you thin. I mean, my mom was not told to quit smoking when she was pregnant with me. The doctor said, no, that's fine. I mean, so we've had wrong information. So if we're getting this now and we're realizing this may not work, but we're not sure what to do as parents, what's the best thing to do right now if you've got tweens and teens in your house and they already have phones and they're already using them?
Best thing to do is educate yourself with information. And the other hard part about this is that the information is constantly changing. So it's like, you can't just read a book or get some information and then you're good. You have to be evolving with the information and some of the new apps and other things that evolve. I mean, you've done so many stories on TikTok challenges. What's the news TikTok challenges? It's eating this or doing this to someone else. I mean, those kinds of things are constantly evolving. I do think it's having parents talk to each other. And so, what's going on with your kids? What are some trends that you're seeing? Really banding together with other parents, trying to keep on top of trends as much as possible. But it's a really, really difficult task because things evolve almost instantaneously.
And if you're not going to take the phones away, if you're not going to make that move, modeling, which is good for ourselves as well, we get pulled down the rabbit hole. You really say it's important to have screen-free time, rules in the house. I know this can be difficult. A lot of times, you might be reading what's going on in the news and asking your teen, well, what's new on TikTok today? But we need to model and have some rules.
screen-free times is really a much more moderate way to manage this. Dinner times, pick a time during, especially now that kids are out of school, so they might have unfettered access. So you really don't want them on screens for 5, 8, 10, God forbid, 12 hours a day, right? To have screen-free time. So from 3 to 4, all phones are away, find an activity to do. I don't care if you color or draw or go for a walk outside or pick leaves, whatever you do, it's screen-free time. So it's instead of having one extreme or the other, using a more moderate approach, meals, screen-free times, conversations, you're having a conversation with someone, your phone's away. You made a comment in Great Day today. I mean, what would it be like for you to do a show with your phone constantly buzzing and beeping and you having to check, and you can't pay attention. It affects attention and concentration. I think it's going to take us years to really figure out how it's affected, the neuroscience in brain development in more detail.
And research is showing we're rewiring our brains. I mean, we're mostly concerned about our kids, but what you have found is it also creates a problem with instant gratification that could have long-term negative effects.
Right, because our phone beeps or buzzes and it like ticks in our brainstem. It's like, oh, someone needs me or someone's messaging me. And so it creates that kind of, well, now I need to see, now I need to look. I mean, and again, I fall victim of this too. I have to moderate myself. I'm in a field where I do have to be more accessible and available based on certain issues. But even, I, like anyone else, I need screen-free times. We all need it. It's an instant gratification. It also feels like sometimes it taps into impulse control. It's like, ooh, I need to check. I heard a beep or a buzz or a bing. And that's why it's so important for young people to get those phones out of the bedrooms at night. Even if they turn them off, they might still buzz or beep or vibrate. And that, that affects that you hear, you sense that in your brainstem. And so it rises you out of deeper stages of sleep. And so it's like having your name called, right? Your name gets transfixed into your brainstem. So that's why they use your name to wake you up out of anesthesia. They'll say your name over and over again because it should trigger a response to be more alert. That's what those beeps and buzzes and dings and vibrations are doing to our children's brains.
And we could also use those beeps for mindfulness if we want to at least use this for a tool. There are devices right there on the phone. As a parent, if you have an iPhone, you can go into settings, you can set screen time. Your kid can't even argue with you. It just kind of goes off. But you can also use the time if they're saying, but I want to have my phone on me. Do you suggest that we teach them good things like, hey, can you just listen to music, or can you use a meditation app?
Yes, and we want to create good habits, or certainly better habits. And that I don't necessarily go with an all or nothing approach, right? So it's trying to realize that there are things that you can do for good. I mean, there are individuals who have, severe social anxiety or, social isolation issues, and, connecting with people online or having some online forums where you can connect with other people who have similar vulnerabilities. That can be really helpful, right? To help you feel like you're not alone. But if you're on those 4 online forums and you're spending 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, that's your only means of interacting with people. You're not interacting with people in real life, only online. Again, that's problematic. So really trying to dial things back a little bit, because remember, the more hours that you're attached to your phone or social media, the more hours you're not being active.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know, you might say I'm using my smartphone to go running or something. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
That's tracking. There are some good points. I get it. It's one of the reasons I haven't wanted an Apple Watch, because I'm always needing to be so mindful and listening to what people like you are saying, that if I had that thing going off on my wrist, I couldn't even put it away. And I know people love their Apple Watches, but that would drive me insane.
Right. That actually, my current watch is dying, and I was just thinking about that same issue. I'm like, should I get an Apple Watch so I can? And I'm like, I don't know if that's a good idea for me, right? Yes. I mean, I need to have some space and some separation. Certainly, I want to track my steps and my heart rate and all those kinds of things to engage in healthy behavior, or encourage more healthy behavior. But yeah, I don't know that that's good, even as adults. Even knowing that I need to have screen-free time, or I'm a pretty active person, so I don't worry about that so much. But again, I didn't grow up. I grew up being an active person because what was there to do after school if you didn't go out and play kickball with the other kids? You sat, there's only soap operas on after school when I was a kid, so there was not a lot to do.
Yeah.
So it made you be more active, and I think this is just, we're creating generations of people that are so inactive and not interactive.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other things that we can talk about when we're on screens for too long, desensitization to blue light. Also, we kind of get messed up. Our kids can get really messed up with no boundaries.
Right. So there's, what's real and what's not real. When you see things on social media, you see people doing all sorts of things, what's real and what's not real. It's really, you kind of lose that perspective of reality, because a lot of times scenes are created, or different stories are created, so you lose that sense of what's real and what's not real.
So if we also need to learn to tolerate boredom. I mean, if I had my kids, I want to go take a break, and to them a break is, let me look at my phone, I mean, and I get they might come home from a sports practice and that might be time to relax on a couch and look at your phone. I guess I used to watch TV, they're looking at videos. But the idea of being bored is something that we never have to be anymore, but it's actually good for our brain to be bored.
It is so good for our brain to have it. Let's not even use the word bored. Let's use the word like free space or downtime, or, I mean, again, we do it as adults. We're standing in line at the grocery store. I'm 3 deep. There's people in front of me that have large carts of items. Do I pull up my phone? What did I do 15 years ago? I just had to think thoughts in my head. We are losing a generation of young people who don't have an imagination, right? If you're going for a walk, you might be listening to music, but that's also a time, because you're not being inundated with information, that thoughts come into your head or ideas come into your head. Or if you're an artistic person, you're not creating art, you're not playing music because you're listening to music. So I think having that quiet time or that downtime, or with less stimulation, it allows our brain to come and our mind to come up with its own thoughts, ideas, and wonderment about things. And I think we're losing that in an entire generation of individuals.
And I'll say that if the children who are fortunate enough perhaps to go to some of the top private schools in Connecticut, some of the boarding schools, whatnot, where people are really sacrificing to go to places like that often feed to the best universities, they all have rules of no phones. They're locked up, they can't have them, there's severe consequences. It's more in the public schools that we have this, I can't cross that line. The parent has to say, or I can, give you a detention, but I can't take your phone away. That's changing. The Surgeon General is suggesting that we, all across America, we not have phones. So the idea that this is an invasion of liberty or something like that, you see this more as a public health concern, that we really shouldn't allow phones in schools, and that might allow parents then to clamp down a little bit more too, because everybody will understand this is damaging.
Right. It is. I do think it is a public health issue. That's why the Surgeon General is coming out with this, the op-ed on Monday. The Surgeon General is saying this is a public health crisis. That is what his role is to alert Americans to public health issues. This is a public health issue. This is it. I guess we could, pare it down to freedom of choice. I think it's bigger than that. Yes, there's a warning label on cigarettes. Does someone still have the freedom of choice to smoke cigarettes? I guess they do, right? Even though we know that it's so detrimental to your health.
Yeah.
So we're not taking away options. We're not banning things. We're providing more information about the long-term negative effects of, in this case, social media for young people. We're providing information. So we're not banning things. We're not taking away choice. But the more information you have, the better decisions and choices that you can make as parents, as teens, as families. The more information, the better.
I mean, I personally think it's a good idea. It gives parents more say, more ammunition, especially if your kids have already been growing up with this or even past the age of 13, which is what you would say is the restriction to actually use the apps when they're allowed to be used, which would be 13 and up. I mean, bottom line is they're savvier than we are. They can get on there. But if I were to argue, I would never have an argument with my kids, are cigarettes bad for you? They know that.
Right.
If they try it, they know that it's really bad. Or I'll say, your grandmother became addicted, like nobody knew back then. You never want to be that. There's no argument. But right now, there seems to be an argument, if you try and talk to a teenager, that the phone is bad for them. They'll be like, oh, come on, all you people just blame it on the phone. Oh, like the phones are really going to hurt me. If there's actually a medical warning based on real data, then there's a awareness, even among kids themselves, like this could be bad for you, and maybe they change more.
And that comes back to the issue of perspective again, right? So in the 70s, if you know, a teenager smoked a cigarette, is a cigarette bad for you? No, but it's the daily use of cigarettes day after day after day. That's what becomes harmful. So it's not any one usage. And you know what, you know, we know a lot of teens are very concrete. Is it the phone that's bad for you, or is it your use of the phone, your excessive use of the phone, your overuse of the phone? Not just, you know, it was raining all day today, and I watched a bunch of movies and I was on my phone all day. It's not just that one day. It's when that becomes your mode of interacting with the world or managing your emotions or dealing with your emotional emptiness or sense of isolation, right? When those devices become your way to manage yourself and doing it longer term, that's when it's problematic. And as I said, young people tend not to have the impulse control or the judgment or their perspective to make different decisions.
Yeah. So bottom line, some takeaways for parents right now, because we don't have, this is going to take a congressional action. We only have a minute left, but 13 years old, limiting it, setting some phone-free times, and really having these discussions that this is a public health crisis for kids.
Absolutely. What I want in any of these situations is to create more dialogue. Because again, it's not just it's not just 1 hour of scrolling that's damaging. It's doing it for many hours, day after day after day. So it's really helping your young person, keeping the lines of communication open and really helping them see that this is taking away opportunities for you to learn and grow in other ways. They won't necessarily believe that, but that is our perspective as adults who have life experience under us.
Dr. Laura Saunders, awesome child psychologist from the Institute of Living in Hartford. Thank you, as always, for your wisdom. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Kara.
And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Kara Sundlin. I like to share information on the cutting edge of wellness. Have a great day, everyone.